Chapter 42 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Daisy 55. Lorna Doone by Ara D. Blackmore. Chapter 42. The Great Winter. It must have snowed most wonderfully to have made that depth of covering in about 8 hours, for one of Master Stickle's men, who had been out all the night, said that no snow began to fall until nearly midnight, and here it was, blocking up the doors, stopping the ways and the watercourses, and making it very much worse to walk than in a salt pit newly used. However, we trudged along in a line, I first, and the other men after me, trying to keep my track, but finding legs and strength not up to it. Most of all, John Fry was groaning, certain that his time was come, and sending messages to his wife and blessings to his children. For all this time it was snowing harder than it ever had snowed before, so far as man might guess at it, and the leaden depth of the sky came down like a mine turned upside down on us. Not that the flakes were so very large, for I have seen much larger flakes in a shower of March, while sowing peas, but that there was no room between them, neither any relaxing nor any change of direction. Watch, like a good and faithful dog, followed us very cheerfully, leaping out of the depth, which took him over his back and ears already, even in the level places, while in the drifts he might have sunk to any distance out of sight, and never found his way up again. However, we helped him now and then, especially through the gaps and gateways, and so after a deal of floundering, some laughter, and a little swearing, we came all safe to the lower meadow, where most of our flock was herded. But before there was no flock at all, none, I mean, to be seen anywhere. Only at one corner of the field, by the eastern end, where the snow drove in a great white billow as high as a barn and as broad as a house. This great drift was rolling and curling beneath a violent blast, turfling and combing with rustling swirls, and carved, as in patterns of cornice, where the grooving chisel of the wind swept round. Ever and again the tempest snatched little whiffs from the channel edges, twirling them round, and made them dance over the chime of the monster pile, then let them lie like herring bones, or the seams of sand where the tide has been, and all the while from the smothering sky, more and more fiercely at every blast, came the pelting, pitiless arrows, winged with murky white, and pointed with the barbs of frost. But although for people who had no sheep, the sight was a very fine one, so far at least as the weather permitted any sight at all, yet for us, with our flock beneath it, this great mount had but little charm. Watch began to scratch at once, and to howl along the sides of it. He knew that his charge was buried there, and his business taken from him. But we 4 men set to in earnest, digging with all our might and main, shovelling away at the great white pile, and fetching it into the meadow. Each man made for himself a cave, scooping at the soft, cold flux, which slid upon him at every stroke, and throwing it out behind him in piles of castled fancy. At least we drove our tunnels in, for we worked indeed for the lives of us, and all converging towards the middle, held our tools and listened. The other men heard nothing at all, or declared that they heard nothing, being anxious now to abandon the matter, because of the chill in their feet and knees. But I said, "Go, if you choose, all of you. I will work it out by myself, you pie crust." and upon that they gripped their shovels, being more or less of Englishmen, and the least drop of English blood is worth the best of any other when it comes to lasting out. But before we began again, I laid my head well into the chamber, and there I hear a faint maw-haw coming through some ells of snow, like a plaintive, buried hope or a last appeal. I shouted aloud to cheer him up, for I knew what sheep it was, to wit, the most violent of all the wethers, who had met me when I came home from London, and been so glad to see me. And then we all fell to again, and very soon we hauled him out. Watch took charge of him at once, with an air of the noblest patronage, lying on his frozen fleece, and licking all his face and feet, to restore his warmth to him. Then Fighting Tom jumped up at once, and made a little butt at Watch, as if nothing had ever ailed him, and then set off to a shallow place, and looked for something to nibble on. Further in, and close under the bank, where they had huddled themselves for warmth, we found all the rest of the poor sheep packed as closely as if they were in a great pie. It was strange to observe how their vapour and breath, and the moisture exuding from their wool, had scooped, as if it were a covered room for them, lined with a ribbon of deep yellow snow. Also the churned snow beneath their feet was as yellow as Gamboa. 2 or 3 of the weaker hoggets were dead, from want of air, and from pressure, but more than 80 were as lively as ever, though cramped and stiff for a little while. "However shall us get 'em home?" John Fry asked, in great dismay, when we had cleared about a dozen of them, which we were forced to do very carefully, so as not to fetch the roof down. "No manner of manning to drave 'em all through all the grit driftness." "You see to this place, John," I replied, as we leaned on our shovels a moment, and the sheep came rubbing around us. "Let no more of them out for the present. They are better where they be. Watch here, boy, keep them." Watch came, with his little scut of a tail cocked as sharply as duty, and I set him at the narrow mouth of the great snow antique. All the sheep slitted away, and got closer, that the other sheep might be bitten first, as the foolish things imagine, whereas no good sheep dog even so much as lips a sheep to turn it to. Then out of the outer sheep, all now snowed and frizzled like a lawyer's wig, I took the 2 finest and heaviest, and with one beneath my right arm, and the other beneath my left, I went straight home to the upper sheppey, and set them inside, and fastened them. 66 I took home in that way, 2 at a time on each journey, and the work grew harder and harder each time, as the drifts of the snow were deepening. No other man should meddle with them. I was resolved to try my strength against the strength of the elements, and try it I did, and proved it. A certain fierce delight burned in me, as the struggle grew harder, but rather would I die than yield, and at last I finished it. People talk of it to this day, but none can tell what the labour was, who have not felt that snow and wind. Of the sheep upon the mountain, and the sheep upon the western farm, and the cattle on the upper barrows, scarcely 1 in 10 was saved, do what we would for them, and this was not through any neglect, now that our wits were sharpened, but from the pure impossibility of finding them at all. That great snow never ceased a moment for 3 days and nights. And then, when all the earth was filled, and the topmost hedges were unseen, and the trees broke down with way, wherever the wind had not lightened them, a brilliant sun broke forth, and showed the loss of all our customs.